Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today, we're going to review a model that really divided the internet. Half the people loved the idea of a Jerry Cantrell signature. The other half said, why do we need a reissue of a 90s Les Paul custom? I can see both sides on this argument, but let's go ahead and get this thing open. So if you're not familiar, Jerry Cantrell, he is part of the band Alice in Chains. They were first formed in 1987, and they really got big in the 90s when grunge was going on. I mean, if I had to describe what their tone's kind of like, it's like a grungy rock. They do have some pretty stellar songs. My personal favorite, and pretty much everybody's favorite, is Man in the Box, because that is just a killer guitar riff, great vocals. You also have the other cool songs like Rooster, Them Bones, that is a fantastic one. I remember playing that in Guitar Hero. But if you'd like something a little bit softer from them, I would suggest Wood and I Stay Away. It's got a really cool orchestral part in there. And for me, Alice in Chains has always been about not necessarily the guitar work. I mean, there are some cool riffs and songs that Jerry had helped created here, but it was always the vocals for me. It stood out from all the other bands. It's so dark and grungy and vibey. It's cool. And Jerry actually does some of the vocals in it. He's not the main guy, Lane Staley, but he would do harmonies with them and all that. So it's kind of cool that he's also part of the vocals that make it so unique. I mean, check them out if you haven't. I mean, people always say I talk about these bands like I'd never heard of them before or something like that, but I try to gear my channel towards people who maybe don't know who this is. I mean, don't be gatekeeping stuff. There's people learning about music that are like 10 and 12 years old today that watch my show. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Jerry Cantrell Wino Les Paul Custom. Okay. So this is an aged signed relic. They only made 100 of these things. And is this the part where I tell you guys, yeah, just like all the other ones, they sold out really fast. They become worth twice as much as they were initially sold for in stores. This one has a little bit of a different tale. As I told you guys, there was a little bit of a controversy over this one if it should have been made. And as of the time of recording this, you'll pay about $1,000 premium, so it's not too bad. But the biggest complaint about these is it's just a 90s Les Paul custom that has been reissued and aged, and they're charging about twice as much as just a regular Les Paul custom. So like if you wanted to buy an original wine red 90s Les Paul custom, at max, we're talking for a really clean one, you might be set back $4,000. So when you compare this thing at $9,000 versus this thing over here for $4,000, it's like, okay, where's that $5,000 coming from? And that's when I'll tell you things like, you know, it's limited edition, it's a collector's / investment opportunity, it's got the piezo in it. And now for my biggest trump card. This is not constructed the same way as his guitar. It's actually been slightly upgraded with historic specs. We'll talk about that on the bench though. Again, they only made 100 of these, and I've seen various reports as to only 30 of these stayed in the States, only 50, but it was a worldwide release, so this is a collectible instrument. It will hold and retain value, probably even go up once there's less of them on the used market. But as of right now, yeah, if you want the one that I have right here, I'll sell it to you for retail price. I'm not going to hold out for anything too high on this one, so you can contact me via my New Guitar Day program if you've been looking for one of these. But other than a collectible nature Les Paul, what else do we got going on here? Well, first off, we have a signature custom case here. It says Gibson Custom like it normally does. This doesn't quite have the same texture that they normally have. It's more slightly flat, but has a little bit of texture to it. But it says Jerry Cantrell right there. It's just kind of a flat back. It's not as cool as some of the other signature cases that we've seen come with some guitars. The interior, it's just pretty basic here. This looks like a Canadian-made case to me. Yep, TKL, made in Canada. It's a nice high-quality case. But as far as case candy goes, it looks like we get a collectible tin of Gibson picks. I was a little bit confused at first. It's like, why are they just Gibson picks? But then on the back, it has a bumblebee. Then we've got the regular pre-pack checklist on here. Schaller strap lock counterparts, spare back plate, and our regular COA that has Jerry on it holding his. And apparently I got number 67. But the big thing you might not know about this guitar is there is something hidden that makes this thing special. It actually has a piezo bridge. So kind of like that Majesty that we reviewed or any of the other ones, they kind of just made this like his. Now, what's kind of interesting though, they did it just like his. So his was retrofitted after the fact, right? Normally when you have a factory piezo, they just route the top down. That way you don't have this big ugly wire showing through here, running through the pickup rings. But the fact that this is a signature recreation of his guitar, I can appreciate that. That is a nice touch. I like it. And then you've got Jerry Cantrell on the truss rod cover here. And then they have this JJ decal on the back, which I thought it'd be JC for Jerry Cantrell. But apparently, Jerry is a junior. So does it mean Jerry Jr.? Somebody fill me in that knows a little bit more about Mr. Cantrell there. Because all of his signature amps that he's had, like his Friedman start JJ, so that's just kind of his thing. And of course, it's signed by him on the backside of the headstock, individually numbered 1 through 100, aged by the Murphy Labs division. I don't remember seeing this on any other one, though. But maybe it is like his, I'm not sure. Maybe it's just I've never noticed it. It just looks like somebody took some crayon to it to mark it up here. But what is kind of exciting, if you go to Gibson's YouTube channel where they did the interview with Jerry, he said at the very end, we're coming out with some really cool JC models we think you'll like. That means this is not the only one. Kind of like the Adam Jones. They're probably going to release this, then 2 to 3 years later, they might come out with something else. But what's unique about Mr. Cantrell is in the 90s, he actually bought 4 90s Les Pauls. He said there was this wine red one that he calls Wino, a trans blue, which I'm curious if he's talking about the Les Paul standard trans blue from the limited colors edition. You can learn about that one in this video. He said he got a black one and then a white one that he did a torch pattern to. I've got to say, I think they did the wrong one at the first time. I think that torched up white one would have been so cool because it's just like nothing else Gibson has ever done. I mean, their aging department, I don't know if they can handle blow torches yet. But that would be cool. I hope to see that one in the future because it's got an interesting vibe to it. But maybe they're just trying to gauge interest because, you know, the guys who grew up with this music, they're starting to get more disposable income. That's why things like this are coming out and is upsetting like the older guitar collectors. And the reason why some guys look down upon this being a 90s Les Paul custom reissue, it comes down to the early 90s is kind of when modern day Gibson was rebirthed. The Les Paul customs that we make today have not changed that much since about 1995, because that's when they started to get the two-piece tops again. That's when the 490 series of pickups came out, 490R, 498T. That's when we got a headstock that looked very similar to this. We no longer had that blocky 80s look to it. So it's kind of a reissue of a modern day guitar, but also, guys, we have to remember, we're getting old here. There's guys that are just now getting into guitar, and 90s is considered vintage to them. I know that's always funny when guys call me out saying 80s is vintage, but yeah, we're getting old here. So this guitar is just kind of like in this interesting point where a lot of people are just so against it, and a lot of guys are all for it. So that is summarizing everything that I know so far about this Custom Shop limited edition release. So to learn more about this guitar, let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench, take an individual look at its parts and specs, and then we will get to that playing demo. Inside Wino, let's talk about what makes this different from his original. So inside here, sleeps a long neck tenon. When I read that in the spec sheet, I was like, oh, okay. So that's something you can use as ammunition against the guys who go, just buy a 90s Les Paul Custom. Those guys don't have long neck tenons. That's a historic spec. It's technically better as far as, traditional guys go anyways. And the other thing that no 90s Les Paul has, it's constructed with hide glue. That's another 50s spec. So you can either see that as a huge upgrade that makes it worth paying a premium for, or you could view it as, hey, this isn't constructed exactly like Cantrell's. However, I'm not exactly sure what year Les Paul Custom his is. Generally, when I see people talk about it, they just say it's a early 90s. But judging by the headstock veneer that they decided to use on this, I'm betting it's probably around 1993 to about 1995-ish. And the other thing you have to remember, guys, is customs were not exclusively made in the custom shop until about 2003, if I remember correctly. In the 90s, these were just standard production guitars. They ran on the regular production line just like the standards and deluxe and anything else that was made. The custom shop did not exist until 1993. So there are custom shop customs in that era, but they're generally reissues of some sort. So the only way I would be wrong on that is if his happened to be like a 68 reissue or something that had the long neck tenon. Because in the prehistoric era of Gibson, pre-1993 when the custom shop opens, they didn't have long neck tenons. That's just not something they did. So there you go. There's something else that makes this different from just a regular 90s Les Paul custom in wine red. But you can see very clean routes here. I'm not seeing any splintering or anything like that. But the other thing some guys, kind of look down upon this signature model for is it doesn't have special pickups at all. These are just the same pickups that would have been in a regular 90s Les Paul custom. So you got the 498T in the bridge and the 490R in the neck. That's the exact same stuff that they use yet today on their Les Paul customs, the standard ones, non-reissue. But this one has an aged gold cover. It's actually a pretty convincing job, I would say. And this one is completely uncovered. Something else that they did custom spec'd just like his guitar is, it's a small thing. The screws used for the neck pickup are a different color than the ones that they use for the bridge. The neck gets gold, which is not what Gibson would have normally used, and then the bridge gets the regular black. So at one point in time, Cantrell must have swapped out these screws on his neck pickup. Just a small detail that might be worth knowing. Now, unfortunately, I can't get readings through the circuit because we have a piezo in this, but generally you're around like 7.5 to 8K ohms on the 490Rs, and the 498Ts are twice as hot. But now let's talk about the piezo bridge. So literally what they've done is they just recreated what he did for his. If you need to add a piezo to any guitar, you just take a little chip out of your existing pickup ring right there that will allow the wire to go into the cavity and go to the rest of this stuff. And the way piezos work is they have a special little saddle system. Sometimes there's a PCB, other times you have a wire coming from each individual saddle. Just depends what type you're using. Oh, and that's cool. It says made in... Oh, nice. That's really cool to me because early 90s ones will actually be Schaller made and say made in Germany just like that. So I wonder, is that just how this particular piezo bridge comes in? It's very possible, or they might have just retrofitted it. It's pretty cool. The type of piezo this is a Fishman power bridge, and looking it up online, yeah, that's just what they say. So I think that is an accidental, hey, we got a really cool 90s era correct spec on there. It just looks like a modified 90s bridge. That's nice. I did notice from the factory, they have the Nashville style bridge on upside down. Because Nashville-style bridges, the screws are supposed to face this way, whereas an ABR1 goes the opposite. So if you want Cantrell tone, you have to put it on backwards. But there you can see the special saddles that they have here, so it's going to give us an acoustic tone. So it seems like you're going to be able to blend acoustic with the electric pickups, or just have straight-up acoustic for their stuff. It's going to be a versatile guitar. You don't find piezos in many Les Paul stock, so that is something that makes this unique. But over here, you have 2 volumes and a tone, and the other one controls this. I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not quite sure which one's which. I'm sure this is probably the volumes. I would guess this is the master tone, and this is what controls the piezo, but we'll find out when I plug it in. And the bridge here is aged just like his, apparently. I mean, it's got some gold here, but the rest has just been like completely stripped off. The back does have that line, which the 90s era's ones do. It's a very prominent one, so maybe they were trying to be as close as possible. But then again, the modern ones usually have that too. As far as the specs, nothing too crazy. You just have a 2-piece maple top with a mahogany body. And just like other 90s era ones, it is 9-hole weight relieved. Anything past 1983, unless it's some sort of a special reissue or an advertised special spec, it'll have some sort of a weight relief as far as like the 80s, 90s, and like early 2000s go, before they start playing around with chambering, and then, yeah, it's too hard to make a blanket statement. So, if you have a 1985 Les Paul Custom that weighs a whole bunch and you think it's solid body, nope, it'll have 9-hole weight relief. Let's take a second to appreciate the aging job. You can see that they intentionally rubbed off some of the rhythm right there to kind of make it look aged and heavily used. You've got the finish checking that they've induced onto this finish. And then I did go ahead and look this up. In the stock photos of the one on the website, they have like a very small one right there. And then he must have touched that up with like a red crayon or something, colored pencil, just so it didn't stand out as much. But this particular one, I don't know, they went hog wild crazy. They put a couple more in there, did the same thing. It did come from the factory like that. I bought it from Gibson. But I do really like the wood grain on this one. It's got some nice rings, two-piece top. I mean, you've got the finish checking pretty much all over here. And so far it seems to be pretty lightweight, all things considered. There you can see a lot of rings. I mean, if we're being honest, most 90s Les Paul customs don't quite age as heavily as this, but obviously Jerry has used his more than the regular Joe. But you can take a look at that dish carve here in the light. As far as the pickguard, they didn't like age it as far as like putting scratches in it, but they did age it as far as like putting a yellowed lacquer over the side to kind of make it look older than it is, so that's a nice touch. Oh, and please keep in mind, I mean, there's a yellow clear coat over top of all of this because that's what gives this that older vibe. So that's going to be different than just a regular Les Paul custom as well. Now, the 90s ones, they'll have aged a bit unless it was, kept in its case all the time. But that's what makes it different from a modern day custom. So now we can move on from the mahogany body and maple top to our mahogany neck that has the Cantrell custom profile. It just feels like a 90s Les Paul custom. But you've got an ebony fretboard on here, 22 medium jumbo frets. You still have the fret nibs, the mother of pearl block inlays here. Standard 24 3/4 inch scale length with a 12-inch radius. They didn't go too crazy on this stuff. I measure 1.66 inches at the nut. That increases to 2.05 by the 12th. 0.86 at the first fret neck depth, and chunks up to 0.98 by the 12th. Here's that neck at the first fret and the 12th fret. It's just a C shape. It's not huge, it's not super tiny, but it's definitely on the smaller side. Very similar to the 90s Les Paul customs that I've actually owned. And now we move on to the headstock. It's just the regular Gibson one with the custom inlay right there and the mother of pearl logo there. There is a little bit of finish checking that they put on here, but not too much. The headstock doesn't have too much going on it. But then I do want to talk about the truss rod cover. So here's what the truss rod itself looks like. Nothing too fancy. But this cover, it's on backwards. So this is the way it would normally go. You can kind of see that white layer, how it bevels outwards. This one, they have the biggest layer on the outside, and then they put his name on it. And this is not the standard quality of a truss rod cover. It's different. They had to make these custom. And I don't know, does he have his truss rod cover on backwards or something? I really wish when Gibson would do these, they would actually take the time to document the original one. That way people can compare their relic job to what it is. But, at the same time, if they did that, then they might have more people upset with them. It's like, you're in trouble if you do, you're in trouble if you don't, right? But I thought that was something that was interesting and worth noting. Moving on to the backside. Doesn't look like he puts too much buckle worming and rashes on his guitars, if this is a accurate representation anyways. So they have one of these custom shop medallions on the back. As you saw earlier, they also give you a plain one if you want it to be more like his. But that's what your toggle switch looks like in here. And then I went to take the back plate off, as I normally do, but then, there's a resistance here. Oh yeah, they've mounted the 9-volt battery for the piezo system on the back of this. It looks like they might just use like a double-sided tape or like a sticky foam or something and just put a metal bracket on it. Probably just like he did right there. So it looks like I was correct in my assumption. So that'll be your volume for your piezo system. It's the far tone knob on the top. Then this will likely be your master tone, and then your 2 volumes for each pickup. It looks like they wired this 50s style, close as they could with this thing in here anyways. Your output jack just located on the side like normal. Looks like we do have a couple of dings in the finish right here, but other than that, just some light finish checking, nothing too crazy. It's not as old as some guitars as they have to recreate. But we've got these Schaller strap locks on here. The counterparts are in the case. I'm personally a fan of Schallers. I like the way that they attach. And now the back side of the neck, also a wine red color, just some light finish checking on this one. And then we get to the back of the headstock, JJ, Jerry Cantrell, signed by him. And then up here, JCW for Jerry Cantrell Wino, and what number you have out of 100. Now I'm guessing what these marks were meant to be is like maybe his original, he had something clamped to the top like a clip-on tuner, or even like one of those GoPro cameras like Davidas uses, but they just recreated it as like some scratches. I don't know. But we do have Grover tuners on here that have also been slightly aged on the tuner tips. It looks like maybe they're trying to recreate some stand wear along the edges, or just a nick and ding. There's some edge wear up here as well. But before we grab the weight, we might as well take a look around the edges. They did a little bit of aging, mainly just some stray finish check lines. Nothing too crazy. No pancake bodies. We're well out of the era of pancake bodies. But you can see the maple cap exposed right here. That's not a defect. First time people look at Les Pauls, they see that. They go, what? Is that a defect? Did they not get enough stain? No, that's called thin binding in the cutaway. It's a 50 spec. So even though technically it would be better to have bigger binding there to cover that over, which some customs do, it's better in the Gibson realm to have that because that's just the way they did it in the 50s. The only thing I don't really like about this aging job is they must be using a knife or something like that, because at the beginning of each of these finish checks, you have like this weird bubbled up lacquer that you don't see that on normal guitars that age naturally. And like it's all over. It's especially prevalent on the treble side right here. Just something I thought I'd point out. Oh, and someone might be quick to judge, hey, you aged everything else, why aren't the knobs aged? Knobs stop aging after like the mid-80s. They started to make them out of different materials that don't yellow as much. Now, if you stick them in a nicotine smoke-filled air, yeah, maybe some of that'll rub off into there, but as far as the knobs themselves, they typically don't age. As much so as like the 50s, 60s, 70s ones anyways. As far as the weight, that's pretty traditional, about 10 pounds. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds. I'm no Cantrell in the playing department, but I'll do my best. Okay, let's go ahead and run through the tones of this thing. Quick recap, these are the regular humbucker pickups, and this is the volume control for the piezo, which you just heard. For this portion, I'm going to be turning that completely off. I've got the tone all the way on 10. So let's hear our neck pickup. Now in comparison to the bridge. Then the middle position, same thing. Quite a few different tones just with that. I mean, the neck pickup is nowhere near as bite and punchy as this thing is. I mean, listen to the neck again. Versus the bridge. But then that middle pickup gets a really nice charm to it. Now we've got all these pickups off, let's just try the piezo. Of course, you can also mix that with the regular pickup, so now it's with the bridge. And of course, you can also have it with everything on. I've got to say, I think that's my favorite position on this whole guitar when you're blending that piezo in. But then you can just roll some of the neck off if you wanted to be a little bit punchier, or if you don't want as much punch, just take some of the bridge out. And in case you're curious about the tuning, it's drop D, but a step below that. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're working with here. So I hope that gives you an idea of the cleans. Now we're just gonna start rocking some Alice in Chains in the dirty channel. I love that song so much, and playing it on this, yeah, it makes total sense. Now, it would help the tuning stability if I had some heavier gauge strings on here, I think, but that's a lot of fun. Now we know all about the Gibson signature Jerry Cantrell Wino Les Paul Custom. What are my final thoughts on this thing? It might not be for everybody, but you cannot deny picking this thing up and playing some Alice in Chains songs. It just feels so right. I am a fan of the band, but I wouldn't call myself like a fanatic that knows absolutely every song of theirs. It's mainly just what I've heard on the radio over the years, but even with that, this guitar is really cool. I never knew he used a 90s wine red Les Paul Custom. So that was good to learn about, and it's just a really nice guitar. Like, these pickups, they don't sound like the normal 490R, 498T. Maybe it's just the whole signature guitar phenomenon going on, but I really enjoyed this guitar. And mixing that piezo in with these pickups, it really does get you such interesting tones. Like, it's even somewhat usable on the distorted channel. But it also helps you nail some of the tones that he uses. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have a wah pedal or a talk box or anything for the really fun stuff, but this was a cool guitar. Is it worth, $5,000 more than a regular Les Paul Custom? That's only up to you. Do you like Cantrell? If you do, you probably wouldn't mind having this. But for everybody else, just buy a 90s Les Paul Custom, put a piezo in it like he did, and you're gonna be pretty darn close to this, except for the hide glue construction and the long neck tenon. Alright, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at this thing. I was pleasantly surprised when I finally got to sit down and play this. The cosmetics, you're either gonna love it or not, but I'm going to call it a day with that. Alright, Troglodytes, thank you for tuning in today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will catch you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care. As always, if you're interested in being the next owner of one of these demo guitars, you can check them out on my website, troglysguitarshow.com. There's some links in the description.